Okay, so this is a teacher talk through of the February mock paper 2, the Gothic Unseen question for OCR, and this was the question was on the haunting of Hill House. How do I usually start this? I would look at the title of the text and contextualize first of all. Okay, and so this is a modern 20th century Gothic. Rather than talking generally about first, second or third wave, I'd be just specific about periods of Gothic. So you could talk about like early Romantic Gothic, such as Castle of Otranto, or late Romantic Gothic, such as Frankenstein. Mid-Victorian Gothic, the urban Gothic, the Gothic of mid-Victorian society influenced by Edgar Allan Poe and the terror of the mind. Late Fantasy Gothic of the turn of the century, then modern Gothic, and then perhaps postmodern Gothic like Bloody Chamber, or Southern Gothic like Beloved, that focuses on themes of race in the southern states of America. So, but that's generally talking. We talked about this as a department, and maybe be a bit more specific about Gothic periods rather than generally waves. Okay, but this is a modern 20th century Gothic text. The haunting of Hill House, so we've got the paranormal or haunting, but also the domestic, the urban Gothic settings. So I would just start with that one, you know, contextualizing it and putting it in its Gothic place. Well, what makes this Gothic? Perhaps I might look at Theodora and Eleanor, you know, nice feminine Anglo-Saxon names, English origins. Could be, you know, Emily from early texts like Castle of Otranto or The Mysteries of Udolpho. Young women in perilous situations, damsels in distress. And they've joined a small psychic group. So again, the paranormal, the uncanny, okay, that's being suggested. A haunting is a typical Gothic motif as well, isn't it? Something that happens. So I'd start general, broad, and then get more narrow, okay? Theodora's grasp loosened. So we're immediately into sensory imagery of touch, right? It loosened and tightened, creating suspense. Some of you talked about how both girls are experiencing fear. It's not, it's Eleanor's experiencing fear. And again, how's that fear usually shown in Gothic texts? Is through sensory imagery, the sounds, what you can hear, the silence, and the use of dark, the ambiguity, obscurity that's typical of Gothic texts you might talk about. She clutched Theodora's hand. Again, the verbs kind of suggest this need for protection. And again, she tried to speak but was held blindly. The adverbs, she was frozen, blindly and frozen. She's, you know, she's frozen. There's a sense of shock, terror in that. And again, she's trying to make sense of it. She stands her mind on its feet. You've got to talk about literary techniques that are going on in the text, okay? You've got to demonstrate you have a sensitivity to how right is right. So the metaphor there of to try and stand her mind on its feet, trying to reason again. So it's a sense of reason battling with imagination in these texts. And that takes us way back to the Castle of Otranto and trying to keep a rein on emotions. Northanger Abbey sort of parodies that excessive emotion and trying to keep a rein on it. So you might talk about any other Gothic texts in which characters are trying to reason with their imaginations. You know, Jonathan in Dracula doing the same, this rational solicitor trying to reason with his imagination. She tried to whisper, her mouth could not move. Again, that sense of passivity brought on by shock is something that you can talk about in Gothic texts. Theodora, she tried to ask, why is it dark? So again, I'll talk about narrative a little bit later, but if you just highlighted how there's a shift from third person narrative to kind of attributed or reported speech. And then, you know, there's, you know, if you talked about free and direct speech, it's possible that it could be, you know, we weren't quite clear or in agreement in the department, but if you're showing a sensitivity to how the narrative is shifting to almost the voice of Eleanor, and of course, then it's given us gaps and things not said, it raises tension. So you should be talking about that a little bit. She tried to whisper, her mouth could not move. Why is it dark? So we get all these interrogatives showing her increased unease. And then we get the voice. So a sensory description. I would look at all of the words describing the voice. Babbling, low, steady. But then it becomes a kind of liquid gloating sound. There's an increased sense of menace. Always look at where you can cluster quote and find patterns. Okay. And this sound is in contrast to her lying still, perfectly still. She listened, that repetition showing the contrast between the noise and her stillness and silence. Again, that sense of, you know, in the Gothic, our senses are heightened, and the repetition is kind of reinforcing that sense of heightened sense of fear and terror. She heard the voice go on, and she hung desperately to Theodora's hand. So she's gone from clutching to hanging on the hand, and she felt an answering weight on her own hand. Now that's interesting. There's a sense of, there's a conscious reaction to her feelings. She felt the hand answer her, okay, which comes significant later on, of course. Let's continue with the sound. It's a little gurgling sound. Okay, but then it's also the rising mad sound of it. There's kind of a contrast here between something quite quiet and innocent and something quite menacing. The use of binary opposites is there in Frankenstein's creature as well. He had hair of lustrous hue, pearly white teeth. He was made beautiful, but great God, he was disgusting. You might notice there was a reading of Frankenstein on BBC4 last night, which a really good reading of it. It's a good way of kind of going over that text. But the sense of binary opposites in Gothic would be something I would kind of highlight here. And the rising mad sound of it drowned out the voice again. So there's ambiguity. Whose voice is this? Then suddenly absolute silence. Okay. But then the voice is heard again, but this time it's a little soft cry, an infinitely sad cry. A little sweet moan, oxymoron there again, of wild sadness, again, kind of contrasting, raising questions of what is this? It's uncanny, perhaps, try and get these words in. What is this? She had never heard the voice before, yet she had always heard it in her nightmares. This is something that's returned, a revenant. So try and get in your Gothic tropes as best you can. Okay, something's come back. Whose voice is it? Please don't hurt me. Go away. Don't hurt me. Again, it's the idea of a child being hurt. Okay, this, you know, crimes against children seem to preoccupy, in some ways, 20th century fiction. You might think of the Wasp Factory. Maybe in a, you know, sadly in a period in which child abuse has been highlighted in the 20th century, much more than in the 19th century, even though it went on. Maybe that prefigures into the fiction of 20th century, crimes against children. We see it. So after sobbing, please don't hurt me, please let me go. So a little sad voice appealing to the focalizer, the central character in this text, might remind me of Wuthering Heights. Who's tapping at the window? Heathcliff, let me in. Let me in. It's me, Kathy. I've come home. Okay, so the idea of voices, discombobulated, you know, embodied voices coming back is a typical Gothic trope. Now, Eleanor's losing it. I can't stand it. Again, the reported speech, it's not in quotes though. Where are the quotes in this? The quotes disappear. It's almost like the merging of the first person. And you might talk about narrative, how we're getting that sense of a first person intimacy. We're feeling what she's feeling, but we don't have all the answers. So if you talked about the merging of third person with first person, maybe in free and direct speech or interior monologue, that would be good, but you should. This is monstrous, this is cruel. They have been hurting a child and I won't let it happen. So it's really gone into first person now, isn't it? It's direct. And the babbling went on, low and steady, on and on and on. So again, that sense of it's incessant, it's not stopping, but we're not given answers. Questions are raised, therefore suspense is increased. Suspense is increased. Right, the voice rising a little and falling a little on. Now Eleanor thought, perceiving. Right, consider these verbs. She thought, she perceived, she thought she was lying sideways on the bed. Now, you know, it raises the question, is this real or imagined? But into the area of perception. And you might talk about Gothic texts in which there's that gap between the real and the imagined. And the verbs kind of highlight that. Thought, she perceived. So if this was a court of law, you know, a barrister would say, did you see it or did you perceive you saw it? There's a difference between the two, and this gap between what's real and what's imagined carries on in this paragraph. Okay, she was lying on the bed, the black darkness. It's like there's a tautology there. Darkness doesn't need the adjective black, but it's emphasizing its blackness there, isn't it? Holding with both hands onto Theodora's hand, holding so tight that she could feel the bones. She could feel the bones. My finger lights up at that. She could feel the bones of Theodora's fingers. Bones suggesting something uncanny, suggestive of death, has connotations of death. Okay? It's there for a reason. The text is showing, not telling. The perceptive reader picks up on the hints. Gothic is often about hints of what's implied. The reader has to infer, right? We have to use inference here. What's happening? Why is Theodora, her child, why has she got bony hands? Well, maybe, is it her hands? I will not endure this, she says. So again, we get the sense of increased panic, increased terror in this paragraph. And the increased emotion, increases the tension, increases the suspense for the reader. Suspense, by the way, is S-E. You can't spell suspense wrong in a Gothic text. I am human and I need to be loved just like anybody else does, the Smiths. I am a person. I am a walking, reasoning, humorous human being. She's trying to battle with what's imagined. She's trying to battle with the supernatural by bringing her reason to the fore. Well done to those people who really engaged with this aspect. I am human, okay? And I will do this. So it's the battle between real, the rational, with the irrational, the terrifying, the supernatural. And well done to you if you talked about, I will take a lot from this filthy lunatic house. The personification of the house is alive. This filthy lunatic house reminds me of Beloved. Remember, I'm talking from extracts, comparing with extracts from texts that we've only looked at extracts of it. We haven't studied beyond, but we've looked at Beloved and we've looked at how the house was haunted. It's personified as a thing. And again, I will not go along with hurting of a child. Hurting of a child is a transgression. Gothic texts deal with transgressions, okay? I will, by God, get my mouth open right now. And again, the appeal to God, religion, she's appealing to something to help her in her battle against the supernatural. I will yell. Stop it. Capitalization is a phonological effect. She shouts out. It's been a dream. The lights go on. Theodora's sitting up in bed. Theodora hasn't experienced any of this. So if you talked about the two girls' feelings, emotions, you've been wrong. It's just one girl. What, says Theodora? How happened? It went on to the next page. Never a good exam answer when they put the transcript onto the next page, because people often forget it. And I've forgotten to photocopy it. But the only thing of note is, good God, the quote, direct speech. Whose hand was I holding? Question mark. The uncanny. Okay, it ends on a Gothic twist, a moment of climax. Okay, if she wasn't holding Theodora's hand, whose bony fingers was she holding? Okay, so we end on the uncanny fingers. Hence why I brought my finger of light. Right, I hope that helps. That ends our discussion of the Gothic Unseen.